First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the call today and welcome you to this beginner's session on using DataSHIELD. It's great to see that we've got so many people here. My name's Tom Bishop and I'm a senior data scientist at the University of Cambridge. And my background is that I've been working with DataSHIELD and with the DataSHIELD team for several years now as part of our Interconnect project. So there are a couple of other people I'd like to introduce that are on the call as well. We've got Alex Westerberg from the DataSHIELD team, who will be doing the majority of the talking today. Alex has joined the DataSHIELD team relatively recently and has been developing and testing functions for DataSHIELD. And I think that because he's relatively, compared to me, sort of new to DataSHIELD, I think he's really well placed to sort of explain how to get into using DataSHIELD, having sort of recently done that himself. We've also got Eleanor Hyde and Elaine Smith on the call, who have been instrumental in setting up the session, so I'd like to just thank them for that. And finally, I need to mention that we have Mavis Machiori on the call. Hi, Mavis. I believe, did you want to say something just about your ethnographic study?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom, and hi, everyone. So as Tom mentioned, I'm a researcher from Newcastle University, and I'm part of the You Can Connect research team. But what our team is looking at is an ethnographic study of DataSHIELD. So we're really interested in knowing how the DataSHIELD team develops their work and the interactions that they have with researchers like yourself. And this just helps us in the wider You Can Connect team to understand data access and harmonization. So you'd have received emails prior to joining with consent forms and information sheets. If you're interested and haven't signaled your consent, I'd be really grateful if you can either email Joel or myself. But particularly if you're not interested, please let me know so that I can note, so when we do the data collection, we know those people who are not interested in participating. Thank you very much. Thanks, Tom. I will just go back in the background and just observe and take notes. Perfect.
Thanks, Mavis. Okay, so then just to set the scene for the session as well, as I mentioned, this is a beginner's session, and we were originally sort of tasked with setting up some just small sessions to help people find their feet and get started with using DataSHIELD, because perhaps sometimes you just need that little impetus to get you going. So although we've got a much wider audience than we thought, that's a great thing, but the objective remains the same, just to try and help people get started with DataSHIELD. And Alex, if we could we show, that's it, show the next slide. That's perfect. So the structure of the session will be that Alex is going to give you first a sort of description about what DataSHIELD is, how it works, and sort of the theory, and then he'll actually illustrate that in more detail with some sort of worked examples live in DataSHIELD. So very brave of him to do a live demo. Then at the end, we're going to have time for some questions, either about sort of what Alex has been describing, or if you had any other questions about DataSHIELD. So that leads to a couple of other quick housekeeping points. Because there's so many people, what we'd like to try and do is everyone stay on mute and ask questions during on the chat during the presentations, and I'll be monitoring that, and I'll sort of interrupt Alex if need be, or we can just address all the questions at the end. And the second point is that we are recording the session, and we will make everything available at the end. So we will send an email around after the session, and there will be the recording of the session, the scripts, the slides, links to the DataSHIELD wiki, links to the DataSHIELD forum, which are really good places to get support and help after the event. So we'll be sending all that around at the end, and there'll be a chance for you to give feedback as well. So I think that's enough from me, and I think I'd hand over to Alex to introduce DataSHIELD and do the live demo.
Cool. Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'll get started. So first of all, who are we? So the DataSHIELD project is quite a long-running project for distributed analysis, and we are led by Professor Paul Burton, who's there on the left, and there's 9 other of us in a recent photo, including me. And then who uses DataSHIELD? So there are some very large users like UCAN Connect, who are a group developing a federated platform and conducting a large-scale analysis on high-value cohort data. And they have 173 European population-based cohort studies with around 2.5 million participants. Another user is Lifecycle Project. So their aim is optimizing early life to maximize the human development potential for current and future European generations. And they have 40 European cohort studies. And then another one to introduce is Interconnect, is a research consortium, one of the first to deploy DataSHIELD. And they are a global collaborative network for diabetes and obesity research. And they have 43 studies ongoing. And Tom works with them. So particular welcome to Longitude as an athlete. I see it's cut off there at the beginning. That's right. Yeah. Longitude as an athlete. I've heard from Eleanor that you are all new to DataSHIELD, so I'm going to make it nice and simple just to make sure everyone gets it. And who finds DataSHIELD? Big thank you to these guys. So UCAN Connect and Athlete have been funding the current version 6 release, and Connected Health Cities and UCAN Connect were funding the previous version 5, which was back last year. So what is DataSHIELD? The key phrase to think about is federated non-disclosive analysis software. And when I started working here, it took me weeks of just defining the words involved to get the point of it. So the federated part, a federated analysis is where the data is remotely stored, and the analyses get sent over to the data. The analyses run on the data, and then only the results get passed back to you at the PC where the analysis is taking place. So why do that? There are risks in transmitting data from sending it over the internet, could be intercepted, or physically on a memory stick. That can imagine problems with doing that. Or perhaps, certainly in that case of 2.5 million participants, the data is simply too large to share. So it makes much more sense not to move the information, but only to move the analyses. Another advantage is the data custodian has control. The data stays on their computers. They can set the disclosure levels they are happy and comfortable with. And one particular benefit that has come to light from all of these health studies using DataSHIELD is it's allowed international multi-study co-analysis. So looking at all of the data in a certain health-related or other field, and do analyses on all of them, and then bring the results back to your computer to infer from that. The other part of it is that it's non-disclosive. So the analysis functions like dsmean, that is DataSHIELD version of the mean function, they're coded so that you will not be able to reveal a single data point or infer about one. So for example, if you tried to run dsmean on a subset of just 2 data points and you found the result bang in the middle of them, that would be quite easy to infer about where the 2 of them are. So for example, dsmean will have to have a certain lower limit of how many participants you calculate that mean on. And all the other functions have this built in by our excellent statisticians on the team, Paul and Dimitri. And also because of that, also because of the good coding of these functions, they retain their statistical efficiency. So now there's an animated slide of what a DataSHIELD analysis looks like. So hopefully this should enable you to visualize what the moving parts are. That's us, the analyst. I'm in UK, so that's about correctly placed. And this is looking at an analysis computer on the client side. This is looking at the data server computer. So we're running an analysis session, probably in the R or R Studio. We've been supplied with these login details, which we then send across to the data server. That means that we're allowed in, we've got the connection, can send commands to the data. Then there's an R environment running on those data server computers. And that means there's a DataSHIELD session running between us and the data. So now you'll have written a bit of R analysis commands, and you can send them. Sending is part of the ds dot prefix for DataSHIELD commands, and then they get used by the R environment on the data server. That's some cogs whirring, and a result is produced. So that's the data server computer doing that results, producing results. And then those results get sent back to us so we can read those results, infer what we can about them. And simultaneously, of course, from all the other servers that we are interested in, they will send back their results, and the meta-analysis results are produced. So you can have the information from all the different studies involved at once. So from seeing that, the problem that DataSHIELD solves, there is a lot of data which can't be shared because of the terms under which it was gathered, but the data owners would be prepared to allow non-disclosive access to that data. So DataSHIELD should be able to speed up the process of gaining access to the data because we are aiming to support a lower level of access. So we're not accessing the entire CSV of all the results, we're only accessing certain non-disclosive statistics. And certainly compared with negotiating with a data holder to obtain a copy of the data, it's a lot easier just to be allowed to send non-disclosive analyses. For example, health data, a lot of people are looking at the same field. They want to do analysis across all the data available in that field of study, and DataSHIELD will allow for this. So why would you want to use DataSHIELD as an analyst? Well, the data you may want to access to analyze, the data holder may only allow that to be accessed non-disclosively. The security is built in, so the results won't be accessible to third parties. And anyway, the only parts being transmitted are statistics that are already made non-disclosive by the functions we've built. It is supported by teams at Newcastle University and across Europe. For example, we've got Yannick in Paris, we've got Dimitri in Cyprus, and Juan in Barcelona. And we're constantly adding new functions to meet the needs of the user base. For example, in recent months, we've added a number of omics, that is the genomics, proteomics, etc. Fields of study. We've added those kinds of analysis functions because that's what's been needed. So how to use it? You'll need an R session. You'll need the DataSHIELD server to connect to and the login details. you will need to have in your R session a login script, and you'll need to have an understanding of what you need to analyze. So now we're going to go out of this slide and into RStudio. So for this, we are only connecting to virtual machines. This is simulating connecting to different studies around the world, but for simplicity and speed of demonstration, it's just going through the local internet to this virtual machine running on my computer. So to the top. So firstly, are the servers up and running? There's a good trick to find out how to do this. I'll escape this. And we can go. So we can load this IP address 192.168.5600. And if this page actually responds, then that means the virtual machine is running. And then we can go back into RStudio, library the respective DataSHIELD packages. And then there's this login script. So the builder is an object locally, and it's using this DataSHIELD interface login builder. So what it actually does is constructs a small data frame to send to the servers, specifying what study we want to connect to. CNSIM is the data we're actually looking at. So that's simulated health style data, which is good for training in. That's the URL we're connecting to, which is a local URL, but in the real life, your data custodian would give you the real URL, the real username and password. It's important to note that what I'm going to do in this demonstration is exactly the same as the tutorial, which is available on our wikis. I will point you to that later. But if you go away later and try and have a go at that, our training tutorial, you will see the same things happening as what I'm demonstrating right now. So hopefully that should help. So we're going to run all of this. So that builds the login data frame, and then this DSI colons datashield.login function actually uses the data frame and sends it away to the server and assigns it on the server to an object we'll call D. I presume D for just data frame. So now we're in. How do we actually find out what is there, what we can explore? Well, obviously you can't use very disclosive commands that you would normally in R, like head. So you can't see all of the top rows of data and what particular values they are. That may be very important health data that you're not supposed to see. So you have to infer things instead. And there are various ways of doing this. For example, the dimension is quite useful. I'm going to run a DataSHIELD function. ds dot is the prefix in front of a command that shows you it is for use in DataSHIELD. And then dim is very similar to the standard R command, dim, just shows you the dimensions. And then this first argument here, that's that D we connected to. That's the data frame on the server. It's important to remember, I always forgot in the early days to put these quotations around it, because it's sending to the server as a string, and then the server is interpreting it as an object. There are various other arguments. This data sources one is quite an important one. It's telling you that this connections object is which server to go and ask for the results from. So if we're going to run dsdim and we get our output. So this information here in red, that is quite a useful loading bar, which says that the request is sending over to the server, and then the server is doing its cogs and whirs and actually running dim and producing a result, and then sending it back to us here. And there's nothing disclosive about this, so we've got the results just fine. It's 5,200 rows with 11 columns of variables for those rows. So what else can we learn about these data? So DS call names is, as you probably guessed now, the DataSHIELD equivalent of regular R call names. So again, we're specifying which data frame on the server and which servers to connect to, and then we're running that. So this one did a few more steps of gathering the data from the servers, and then it's returned us the results separately for study 1 and study 2, but all the results are the same. So each data frame contains the same columns. So when we run analyses on, for example, which is one? Lab HDL is what we're going to explore a lot in this tutorial. It's going to run on the columns in both of those servers. So I've gone onto the Open Web portal to check that Lab HDL is an abbreviated way of saying HDL cholesterol, which I just quickly Googled is actually the good cholesterol. But in the actual real deployment of DataSHIELD, your data custodian should send you the information, the metadata of what each column of the study is about, and so that you can understand what you're trying to analyze. You're not just trying to guess names. So what else can we learn about Lab HDL, or good cholesterol? Well, we can find out what class it is when it's stored on the server. So it goes away to the server, comes back, and we are told it's numeric in both cases. Glad to see that. And what are some summary statistics on Lab HDL? So its mean would be quite interesting. What sort of size of variables are we looking at? So again, we're specifying, X is specifying the data frame D on each of the servers, and then $, just as you would in regular R, to address a particular column of a data frame, and then Lab HDL column. Again, remember the quotations about anything you're sending away to the server. We've run that. So there are two parts to this result. The top part is actually the interesting bit. So the second study is ever so slightly lower than the first study in its cholesterol level. There's additional information about which values, or how many values are missing compared to how many valid. But the second part of the output is telling you that in both cases, the mean calculated on the servers are valid. So sometimes when you run DataSHIELD commands, there are errors which come back that tell you it was invalid, therefore you get no results. You have to have a think about, what did I do wrong? What did I maybe ask the server to do that was what did I ask the server to do that was disclosive? You'll have to tweak that to ask the server to do something non-disclosive. There's another similar-ish command called ds quantile mean, which not only calculates the mean but the quantiles as well. Interestingly here, the 50th percentile, 1.57, is slightly higher than the mean, 1.56. This is interesting, it's only shown one result. That means that it has pulled both of the studies together. Maybe we didn't want to do that, so we'll have to have a look at the arguments. ds.quantile mean, and then we'll run that to get help. There's a help file for every single DataSHIELD function that is introduced, specifying like what its arguments are, details on how to use it, and in more and more examples we've authored some. We've created some examples of how to run it in case you're wondering what it does. So in this case, we're loading the help to see that there is this type equals combine argument, which we actually want to use. So I'll copy this across and run it again with a slightly different argument. So type equals combine. So this has a new argument written into it, but we don't want to combine it like this. We want to separate it. So the argument name for that is split. Now run that. Goes away to the servers, does the commands we asked it to, and then comes back. And the result of this is slightly different percentiles for study 1 to study 2. So, all right, that's maybe solved what we were looking for. Now dsvar, I haven't created an example command for this, so we're going to have to investigate the help for how to use it. So run the help command with the question mark. Just worth pointing out that's the same as how you would query a regular R function. So it's this, the arguments are X for the data frame and vector you're connecting to. You can split it or combine it just like the previous function. This checks thing we are not interested in for this demonstration, and always remember to specify the data sources. I'm going to copy this across, get rid of checks, called data sources connections because that's what we called it on this computer, and going to have a look at the column $labhtl just as we were doing before. Right, and run that. So we can see that the variance is slightly different between the studies. It's lower variance on the first study than the second study. Again, there's this message to us that the commands on the server have been proved valid, not disclosive. So what if we were just interested in, say, calculating the standard deviation for study 1? Well, you could copy and paste, but that's a bit cumbersome if you're doing a larger analysis. But what you could do instead is assign the result to a local object. I'll use lowercase a. And then I'll copy. So that goes away to the DataSHIELD server and then comes back to the local client and assigns all of this text to A. Right, that's not very good. So we want to just chop it up and look and assign only one number. So we're going to have to go into we're going to have to look inside the object that's created back on the client side and say the first part. So what does that create? The first part of this is only the table of results, but still that's not quite enough. So we're going to have a look inside that table and do the first. This is like addressing a part of a matrix or a data frame. It's first column, first row. And then we check what it is. And we've picked out that the A is the variance of the first study. So that's good. You can always assign to the local environment something you have created on the DataSHIELD server and it's fed back to you. Do be aware that I'm using these double brackets because quite often what comes back to you, all of this all of this result is often stored locally as a list, so the double brackets addresses it as a list. So what else have we got in DataSHIELD? There's a certain type of function called assign. Assign means it creates an object on the server side and then leaves it there. This is as opposed to what comes back, which is an aggregate function. So dsmean, dsvar, that feeds back result to us. That's an aggregate. But dslog is an assign type function. It creates it on the server, calls it a name on the server, and keeps it there. So what dslog is doing is taking all of the values under the lab HDL column and creating the logged value of every single one of them. Obviously, it would be foolish to feed that back to the analyst because they could just reverse log, put it to an exponent, and there they have the disclosure values again. So all you can do is store it on the server and then do more inference on it. So if we run dslog, this is creating a new object on the server called lab_hdl_log. And then trying to infer about this, if we did ds.mean on x equals the new object name, so we're not talking about d at all anymore, we've created a new object, and then data sources. You can see that the mean of these logged values are at 0.4, so I would say that sounds about right. It sounds like we have successfully created logged values on the server side. There's also this command dsassign. This is to do things like run functions on the server side, or run functions on vectors stored on the server side. So in this case, the lab HDL is the vector, and to every single one we are subtracting 1.562, which I believe was the pooled mean. And again, this is an assign type function. It's literally in the name. So it's creating a new object on the server side, and it's called labhdl.c. We're going to do ds.mean on that new object. Lab.c. And don't forget the data source. There we go, very close to 0. So that is somewhat normalized it to 0. Obviously, there's many functions you could apply to a vector, like in another analysis I'm about to show you, I tried to scale to population size, so I times by a million and then divided by another vector called population. Other things you can do in DataSHIELD is DSTable creates a table. You can get one-dimensional ones, so we're just looking at the gender. And DSTable works on variables that are stored as factors. So what we would do before this is ds.class of $gender. So yeah, this confirms it's a factor for us. Then we can run the table. It creates the table. So it's saying that 51% are whatever 0 is encoded as male or female. I haven't gone away to the server, but hopefully you would have some information to tell you that 0 meant male. There are also some outputs like doing the proportions by column and doing the proportions by row. Row and column, sorry. There are also two-dimensional tables you can run. So this will create contingency tables that could have a chi-squared test run on them. So let's go into the help of DS table. So the argument we want to include is report chi-square tests. It hasn't done it this time because the default was false. So let's do it again with it as true. We'll do it here and report chi-square tests equals true. So after all of the first bit of the output, which is proportions and counts, then you'll get the part of the output which is reporting the chi-square results. So you get a chi-squared statistic, degrees of freedom, and a p-value. You can also plot graphs in DataSHIELD, so you can have histograms. I'll run this one. You need to make the plots area large enough, but yeah, so this is interesting seeing on study 1 and study 2. Usually the DataSHIELD output does separate into by study, which I'll show you in a second on some COVID data. It also can do contour plots. So it's important to note that all of these plots have been coded so that you can't infer about individual data entries. So, because if it was like telling you that one result was at lab TSC 3 and lab HDL 2.5, then that's as good as directly telling you. But instead, these contour lines just show you the gist of where the most number of occurrences are, but don't tell you individually about the results. You can also get heat map plots, which do kind of the same thing, tell you where the peak of the data are, but don't tell you actually disclosive information. Then the final plotting function is a scatter plot, recently developed by Dimitri. And for this, I will connect to a different data set because it shows it really quite nicely. So first thing to do is, if we're connecting to a different data set, is log out. So it's this DSI datashield.logout function. So we'll run that. And then over here in this different script that I've already written, I've got the login builder, which talks about a different server. And so this server has different studies called Africa, America, Asia, Europe. So it nicely visualizes that in real life, the data you're analyzing is spread all across the world. For the purposes of this, I've actually uploaded this data on the same virtual machine, because otherwise I would have to close down these virtual machines and launch new ones, which takes up to 5 minutes. But also it's worth noting that you can go away and download the virtual machines with these data on them and have a go yourself exploring some COVID data. So I'm going to run all of this. It takes slightly longer because it has all of the different studies to log into. So yeah, as said before, the 5 seconds, it just reflects that there is quite a lot going on. There's the transmitting stage, there's the analysis stage at the other end, at the server end, and then the transmitting back the results stage. So there we go, signed all of tables. And then another interesting part of the datashield.login function is it does tell you what variables there are on the server side. This is quite similar to the DS call names. So I'll just check the the dimensions. That shows you there's quite a lot of data in these studies. So a total of 22,000 rows. So the context for these data is all of the cases and deaths for various countries around the world. And we're going to have a look at them. So DS scatterplot, that will go away to each server and create an anonymized scatterplot. So none of the actual points on this scatterplot are the true values. There's a nearest neighbors algorithm which shows you the gist of where the data go, but not the actual disclosive results. So these, it's interesting, but unfortunately this is June overlaid on January and March and April, etc. So it'd be much more interesting to get the day of the month with the cases for that particular month. To do that, we're going to have to take the data frame and subset it. So for this, we've got this particular function ds.dataframeSubset. So it is taking the object on the server D. It's looking at the column of that data frame $month. And then what we're doing is applying a Boolean operator of exactly equals to it. So we're doing exactly equals month equals 1. So this will create a subset of all the January data. I'm only going to run it for January through to March because this takes quite a long time. I presume because there's quite a lot of computing being done at the server end. Yeah, so again, I will be going on to the next slides once I'm done with this demonstration in about 5 minutes, just to show you there are links to the GitHub where the virtual machines and the explanation of the analysis are stored, so you can have a go yourself. There we go, we've created January, February, March subsets. Let's have a look at what January, February, March dimensions are. Yeah, they're a lot smaller than the tens of thousands we had previously. And now we can run a scatter plot. If we run a scatter plot on January, there is an error. Yes, I knew it was coming. There is a DataSHIELD errors. So why that is, if we all were reading the news feverishly back then, in January, the cases weren't very spread around the world. So that will mean that there are so few points to plot that DataSHIELD has decided it's disclosive and therefore we can't have the plots. But if we try and do a scatter plot of March, goes away to the different servers and generates the plots and then compiles them back here at the client side. These are the split, the plots for the various different continents just for March. So you can see in Africa the numbers are below 200. In America there's one particular trend going very, very high. The numbers in Europe, as we all know, were going quite high in March. And in Asia was slightly more steady. So that's helping you see DataSHIELD in terms of context of something going on at the moment. There are a few more types of functions, particularly there's GLM functions, which are used a lot in omics, I gather. It's not my area, but there is a part of the tutorial which shows you through how to use those. And as with all the other DataSHIELD functions, there is quite a lot of help files to ask about the various arguments. So I'm done here, and I think there is, yeah, time for questions. There we go.
Great, thanks very much, Alex. That's a really good explanation of how things work and really well explained. So thanks very much for that. We've got a couple of questions so far. The first one is it possible to use DataSHIELD with Stata? And I can have an attempt at answering that one. And the simple answer is no, not at the moment. I believe the intention always has been to try and keep DataSHIELD as a kind of open source type of platform, so not involving paid for software. And equally, that sort of very open nature of R means that I'm pretty sure that anything that you can do in Stata can be done in R, either through existing packages or it could be developed for R. If the concern, I guess, might be about not knowing how to code in R, and that's something that I went through myself. There's work in progress to try and create a sort of user-friendly web type of interface for people in that situation. But equally, there's lots of support available. We've obviously had this session, and there's all the materials on the wiki and support available through the forum. So I hope that addresses that question. I don't know if you want to add anything, Alex. Or
Tom, could I just add something? So yeah, thanks. That was a perfect answer. You summarised exactly the situation as it currently is, and I think whether or not in the future it will be possible to directly drive DataSHIELD from other softwares, including Stata, is something that we're going to have to just see how that comes in terms of its priority.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So the next question was around the assign type of functionality that Alex illustrated, where he said that you could use ds.assign and then type in some sort of command. I think he had the lab cholesterol and took away 1.56 from it. And the question is, can you actually just write any base R function in there? And again, I think the answer to that is no, you can't, and that's for reasons of preventing disclosure. So only a prescribed set of functions can be executed through that. I think, Paul, do you want to?
Can I add something? So basically, what you can do is you can put any R command into there that is one of the server-side functions. So, for example, at the log of a variable happens to be defined as a server-side function, and therefore, when you send that command, it's recognized as being valid. But in general, it's not very often that you find yourself in a position where you want to put a command into there that is other than the straight normal arithmetic operators. And the other thing to say is that if there was a particular function that you did want to be able to do in there, we could very easily add that in for you. So if there's a particular thing that you need to be able to use, if you contacted us, we would put that in.
Great, thanks, Paul. So next question, does the scatterplot command fail completely if there are too few data points in a single region, or does it still plot the other four? I have to say I don't know the answer to that. Is Demetrius?
Demetrius on?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so basically when you have only few points, basically the graphical functions can be used with two different methods of anonymizing data. The first one is addition of random noise. So if you have any number of points, you add a specific random noise with a certain variance where the variance is specified by the user. The second option, which is what Alex showed, is when you have some points in a two-dimensional space, you look for the k nearest neighbors of each data point, and you replace the coordinates of each point with the centroid of those k nearest neighbors. So if you have a small number of data on the same region and those data are overlapping, you will get the same centroid. So what you will see at the end, you will see a single point, but will be corresponding to more than 3 initial data points.
I think it's worth mentioning that in one of these links to the ERAM GitHub, I have included a link to some slides where Dimitri explains his methodology on a PowerPoint. So you can read that as well if you're curious.
Great, thank you very much. So the next question is about, again, assigning variables on the server side. And the question is, when you do that, are they only stored there temporarily, or do they become part of the data sets for others to use? And I think the answer is that they are temporary. They're only in existence as long as the session is running. But there is a feature, a function called DS workspace or something like that, that allows you to sort of do some work, generate some new variables, and save it on the server. And that is managed through Opal, actually, for each server. So each sort of server manager can keep a track of how much space is being used up on that server.
In effect, it's exactly the same as normal R, because in normal R, unless you deliberately save the worksheet, it will only be temporary. If you turn off R, it will disappear. But knowing about saving the worksheet is one of the most useful functions you can have. So I strongly advise people to use it, because it's if you do a whole lot of preparation work on a particular set of data, you're ready to make it and ready to analyze it, and then something happens and the computer sort of bombs out or something, you then got to start all over again. So it's definitely worth learning about this, saving the worksheets.
Okay, next question, a very quick one. Can we ask more questions on a questions and answers website? Yes, we definitely can. There's the DataSHIELD forum, which is the ideal place for that. And I think the link has been posted in the chat and will be sent round again afterwards. Next question. Can I load regular R packages such as tidyverse, ggplot2 and so on? I assume that means on the client side, and in which case the answer would be yes. So if you were doing your DataSHIELD work and then you got some results back on your client side local to you, you could still use tidyverse and ggplot on those results. I don't know if anyone, Paul, do you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, was the person asking that question, were they talking about the client side? Because that's clearly the right answer for that. They weren't asking about the server side.
I think the client side, they've said.
Oh, okay, great, yeah.
Chat.
Because we're also in specific relation to tidyverse, for example. One of the things that we are potentially thinking about adding things around the tidyverse to the server side as well. But whenever you add R packages to the server side, that has to be done by the development team, because we have to do the non-disclosure preparation to make sure nothing that's going in is potentially disclosive.
Well, you say that it has to be done by the development team. Of course, you'd welcome people.
Oh yes, sorry.
Their own functions that can then be.
No, absolutely, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Included.
Tom, just before any more questions, do you want to explain the last slide about the DataSHIELD user experience sessions? It's just 5 minutes to the hour.
Yes, I can do. Another thing that we should, I think I actually did mention previously, was that some work is being initiated on creating a sort of more user-friendly web style user experience for people to use, and that's going to be developed in conjunction with user experience experts at Newcastle. And as I understand it, the way that they do this is actually asking users what they would like and how they think it should work, and that's done through user engagement sessions. So we'd like to advertise those to the group here, and again, I think these details will be sent around in the email that that will follow this session, and that will be in the coming months. And I encourage you to contribute and drive the future of DataSHIELD and how it will look like.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a couple more questions. This one is a little bit more tricky. So someone has a concern that we may gain time in being able to access data via DataSHIELD, but in some ways lose it, because if the functions aren't developed for DataSHIELD, we have to do that or wait for it to be coded up. And how hard is it for a function to be coded up to be used in DataSHIELD? Do you want to go Paul? Or?
Well, I don't mind. You've obviously you've developed as many stuff as me. So
yeah,
I mean the issue is that one of the things that we've really learned how to do much more in a much more streamlined way is add new packages, and how long it takes depends basically on how potentially disclosive that particular package is. Sometimes you can virtually just add something directly with doing very little extra to it, but other times it requires a lot of work. So I think that the proper way to think of it is, if you do want extra functionality, then basically it's definitely something to discuss with us in terms of getting advice if you're not sure. And sometimes the answer will be that it's quite easy, and sometimes it will be that it takes quite a long time. And it's purely down to the closing off the disclosure loops, holes in it, basically.
I guess, so I mean, my view on this as well is that, of course, there is some pain or there's some work to be done to do that, but once it's done, it's done.
Yes.
So, you know, the more people that contribute, the more that will be available for everybody to use in the future. So it's it's a nice democratic model, I think. There's another excellent question. Can GLMs be performed by pooling all the data, or can they only be applied to studies in a meta-analysis style? And in which case I refer this question to the advanced session that was run a couple of days ago, where that exact topic was covered. And indeed, we won't go into the details now, but it's possible to either virtually pool the data as if you were fitting one model to all the studies, or to fit a model to each study and then meta-analyze them. So both options are there. There are pros and cons. It was covered in the advanced course, which should be available online for you to look at. I don't know if you want to add to that, Paul.
No, that's perfect answer. Thanks.
One more question just come in. Just out of curiosity, are the DataSHIELD functions written in R or in a lower level language like C or C++? They are written in R, unless I've really misunderstood something over the past few years.
No, I don't think we've got any that are not in R. I mean, theoretically you could write them not in R. And now that we've got the resources thing, I think it could be we end up doing some stuff in lower level, but at the moment they're all in R.
I mean, that is a good point, that through the latest development, a concept that's called resources, which allows DataSHIELD to reach out to sort of alternative data sources merely using R as a wrapper for those. So, for example, I've seen some people have developed a function that allows you to actually run Plink, which I understand is like a command line genomics function. So yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't use that mechanism if you wanted to get a bit more low level and write something in C.
Can I add something on that? We have one exception in DataSHIELD. Then graphical functions, because they call a specific R package, which is called run, basically RANN. And in this package, there is a function that is looking for the k-nearest neighbors of each data point. This function from this package is written in C++. So in our server-side function, we call this function from that specific package. So we have an example of one DataSHIELD function that calls a C++ written function, but all the other DataSHIELD functions are written in R.
Fantastic. Okay, well, there we go. I've learned something. I think we'll have to. There's one last question, I think, this will have to be the last one because we've gone over time. It asks about implementing a new, if someone else were to implement a new DataSHIELD function, how is it determined whether it's disclosive or not? What's the process for that? And I think the answer is that that's something that we're currently working on as we're at this exciting time of people starting to contribute their own functions. And I think that's something that as a community, we need to decide.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you agree with that, Paul?
No, yeah, exactly. We're basically, there's a whole, over the last year, the whole project has become much more community focused as opposed to led by one or two centres. One of our early plans, and I'm hopefully, which have been put on hold because of COVID basically, but we're hoping to basically look at the overall governance of the project. And one of the first things that we're talking about is what we need to do in order to enable people to contribute things. So it's a very good question.
Great. I think we're now sort of over time. I've got another meeting to go to.
Any more questions? Certainly either email them to datashield@ncl.ac.uk, which I will just put in the chat, or post it on the forum, which I will also post in the chat.
Great. So, well, I guess I can wrap up by saying thanks to everyone for coming. It was great to see so many people on the call. Thanks to Alex for the presentation, and to Elaine and to Eleanor for coordinating everything.
But Tom,
and to you as well, Tom.
Yeah, and you, Paul.
And Paul, yeah. Okay.
And Dimitri.
Well, no, not me. No. I didn't do anything. No, it's Tom. Well, Tom and Alex, definitely.
If I could ask everybody to fill in that form with the feedback, we'd be really interested to know what everyone thinks of this. We want to really take these workshops further, to do more beginners workshops, to do more advanced workshops, etc. So we're really interested to hear what you thought of this. So we want to pitch the level right. So do please let us know what you think. That'd be great. Thank you very much all for coming, because it's been a brilliant time. We've had 97 people. Amazing. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Alex.
Brilliant.
So we close off now.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.